They never found the journal, only the bullets I had buried underneath the lonely rose bush I planted. My plane tore through the French sky like a metal angel in flames, spitting me into a green hell. The war wanted me dead, but something much older and darker found me first in those deep woods. If you think the sound of a crashing plane is the worst sound, you've never truly heard silence. A silence that comes right before the scream, a silence that feeds on the ever-present fear inside us. It is in that void that the real story begins, not with a bang, but with the chilling whisper of dread. That Greystone convent was both my salvation and, at the very same time, my eternal damnation. Every face, there was a constant reminder of what I had lost, and, worse, what I still had to lose. They gave me a rake and a false name, but at night, I unearthed the soldier I had once been before. Follow me into this descent, but be warned, some tombs, once they have been opened, never close again. The scent of pine and burnt ozone still fills my nostrils whenever I close my eyes, even today. My parachute tangled in an ancient tree, an oak hangman holding me in limbo between two worlds. Down below, guttural voices were cutting through the morning fog. Dogs barked with death's hunger. I hung there for a whole day and a whole night, seeing the world upside down like a silent bat. Thirst was sandpaper in my throat, and fear was a rat gnawing at my insides without any hurry. I cut the cords with my pocket knife at dawn. The fall was cushioned by bushes, dislocating me. I crawled for miles, the pain a hellish symphony playing along each and every one of my bones. That was when I saw the chapel's tower, a Greystone dagger piercing the day's overcast sky. A sanctuary or just another trap? At that very moment, the difference no longer mattered to me. Any place was better than waiting for the wolves that were certainly already sniffing out my trail. The iron gates groaned like the bones of an old skeleton complaining of its unending, eternal sleep. A nun with a face wrinkled like an ancient map found me collapsed at the convent's main entrance. Her eyes held no pity, only a profound weariness, the heavy weight of 1,000 secrets kept. She asked no questions about the torn uniform or the dark blood that was staining all my clothes. She just pointed to a small shed in the back, where they kept the old garden's rusty hand tools. "You are mute," she said. Her voice was the rustling of the dry leaves. "And deaf. You understand?" I simply nodded my head, the lie becoming a second skin, an armor against this strange new world. The convent was a living organism, breathing in whispers and prayers that echoed off the cold walls. But beneath the forged peace, I could feel a current of dread, a tension that vibrated in the air. There, the silence was louder than any of the bombs that had ever exploded anywhere near me. By day, I was Antoine, the gardener who couldn't hear the call to mass, nor speak any words at all. My hands, which were trained to fly a machine of war, now learned how to properly care for roses. The children watched me from a distance, little ghosts with large, sad, and very suspicious eyes. They were Jewish. I knew from the medallions the nuns always made them hide underneath their clothes. Each stifled laugh was a fragile victory. Each frightened glance an open wound in that sad place. At night, when the moon painted the gargoyles with silver, I became an entirely different creature. I would dig up my pistol from the bottom of a fertilizer sack, the cold steel an old, familiar friend. I patrolled the convent's perimeter, a shadow among the others, hunting the sounds of the dark. The wind carried fragments of German chatter from the roads, getting closer and closer each night. I wasn't planting flowers. I was sowing a minefield of both constant vigilance and burning hatred. Paranoia is a weed. It grows with frightening speed in the fertile soil of fear and isolation. I started seeing things in the trees, the glint of binoculars, the outline of a helmet in the dark. Was it real, or was my mind, fractured by the fall, creating monsters in the deep night darkness? One night, a branch snapped with a dry crack, far too loud to be just any animal passing through. I remained motionless for an hour, the pistol firm in my hand, cold sweat running down my spine. The sound didn't repeat, but the feeling of being watched, that feeling never left me in peace again. The children felt it too. They would suddenly stop playing, staring intently into the dark woods. One of them, a girl named Leah, with dark hair, would draw faceless men with little sticks. Men who were always hiding behind the trees in every single one of the drawings she made for us. I asked the Mother Superior, using gestures, and she just traced a cross in the air, apprehensively. The forest that surrounded us was no longer a refuge, but a cage that was slowly closing in on us. I decided I had to reinforce the defenses, but how could I do it without arousing any suspicion? I used the old wires from a chicken coop fence to create tripwire traps throughout the deep woods. I spent entire dawns stretching wires at ankle height, in blind spots between all of the trees. Old cans, which were filled with stones and hung from branches, a primitive and lethal alarm system. During the day, I was the harmless gardener, whistling a tune I could no longer even hear myself. One day, I saw Leah and two other children laughing near the back wall, a rare and precious sound. They were playing hide-and-seek, and for a moment, the weight in my chest seemed to lighten up. But then I saw where they were, just a few feet away from one of my most dangerous, deadly traps. My heart froze. I ran, pretending to trip, making a loud scene to get their complete attention. They got scared and ran away. The laughter died, but they remained alive, at least for one more day. Autumn arrived, painting all the leaves the color of blood and rust, a bad omen on the landscape. The patrols on the road became much more frequent, the sound of the engines a constant, low growl. One night, while checking one of my traps, I heard the sound I dreaded most of all, a single click. A metallic sound, followed by a muffled curse in German, coming from very close to where I was. My blood turned to ice. Someone had found one of my wires. The hunt had finally begun for real. I crawled through the damp earth, the smell of mildew and fear filling my lungs, suffocating me. I saw two silhouettes against the moonlight, soldiers examining the broken wire with a flashlight. They weren't just passing by. They were mapping the terrain, actively searching for a weakness. They couldn't see me. The darkness was my ally, my confessional, my one and only faithful shield. I returned to the shed before dawn, but sleep wouldn't come. The enemy now had a visible face. In the chapel, the nuns and the children prayed with a fervor I could no longer feel within myself. Their lips moved in pleas for salvation, for a miracle that would take them out of this nightmare. I stayed outside, sharpening the blade of my spade. The sound of metal on stone was my own prayer. God had certainly abandoned that cursed place, if he had ever even been present there to begin with. The only faith I had left was in the cold precision of a gunshot, in a well-sharpened blade. Leah watched me from the chapel window, her gaze not of accusation, but of a pure curiosity. She didn't understand why the mute gardener never joined them inside to pray to their silent God. How could I pray to the same sky that had shot me down and thrown me into this endless purgatory? My hands were dirty with grease and soil, and soon they would be dirty with something much worse. Salvation would not come from above. It would have to sprout from the ground, from the dark earth. On a cold afternoon, while I was pruning the rose bushes, Leah approached me in complete silence. She held out her small hand, and in her palm, there was a little lead soldier, its paint worn away. The toy had one broken arm, but she offered it to me as if it were a truly valuable treasure. I looked at her eyes that contained a whole galaxy of unspoken sorrows and deep sadness. She pointed to the soldier, then to me, and made a gesture as if she were standing on guard duty. She knew, somehow, that child understood my real purpose there, my own secret and personal war. I clutched the small lead soldier in my hand, the cold metal a link to the life I had left behind. It was the only moment of true human connection I had in months, a breath of warmth in the winter. That night, I placed the little lead soldier on my shed's windowsill like a tiny sentinel. He would watch with me, a broken guardian for a broken angel, both of them in a long-lost war. The snow began to fall, covering the world with a white shroud, erasing all of the hidden paths. This was both good and bad. It made access difficult, but it would also reveal any footprint. One night, one of my alarms sounded, a noise muffled by the heavy snow falling from the sky. I went to investigate and found heavy boot prints leading right up to the convent's back wall. Someone had been there, very close, studying the architecture, looking for a point of entry. I followed the tracks to the road, where they joined others. A reconnaissance patrol, for sure. I went back, and on the dusty floor of the shed, I began to draw a map with my own fingertip. The convent, the walls, my traps, the patrol routes that I had already completely memorized. I was no longer a pilot. I was a strategist, a cornered animal planning its desperate defense. The snow outside kept falling, and I knew that it wasn't purifying anything in that lost place. They came on a moonless night, a darkness so complete that it seemed to have swallowed the stars. I was in my makeshift watchtower in the old belfry when I finally heard the very first sound, a dog barking in the distance, and then a sudden and ominous silence. They had silenced the dog. My heart hammered against my ribs, a war drum announcing the terrible battle that was about to come. They were professionals, moving like specters through the forest, skillfully avoiding all my traps. But I knew that terrain like the back of my hand, every root, every stone, and every single shadow. I climbed down from the tower in silence, my pistol in hand, the gardening knife in my belt. The children were sleeping, unaware of the circle of wolves that was closing around their shelter. The nuns were praying, perhaps sensing the pressure of the evil that was approaching that place. And I, the only one who didn't pray, moved towards the danger, towards my own personal sin. The first one I found near the old well, trying to force open a window to the main refectory. He didn't hear me arrive. The sound of my knife cutting through the air was the last thing he felt. There was no struggle, just a dead weight falling into my arms, a warm final sigh on my face. I dragged the body into a dense bush, the adrenaline singing a feverish, haunting song in me. The second one was near the main gate, cutting the old chains with a pair of heavy bolt cutters. I struck him on the nape of the neck with the pistol's grip, the hollow thud muffled by my hand. 2 down. The smell of blood and sweat was nauseating, but I kept going, driven by a cold instinct. I wasn't a soldier fighting for my country. I was a predator defending its territory, its young. Every life that I took was another brick in the wall of my own damnation. I was aware of that. But the images of the sleeping children's faces burned behind my eyes, always pushing me forward. I became the darkness itself, the thing that hides in the shadows that they should have feared. The group's leader was coordinating the invasion by radio, near the east wall, crouched down low. His voice was a hoarse whisper, ordering the others to advance with more caution toward the site. He was more careful, more experienced. He sensed that something was terribly wrong there by now. I was above him, hidden in the branches of an ancient oak tree, waiting for the perfect moment. When he stood up to inspect his surroundings, I let myself drop from above, like a stone from the sky. The landing shattered my ankle, a searing pain shooting up my leg like a bolt of pure lightning. But my weight knocked him down, and in the fall my knife found its mark, silencing his radio. I lay there, gasping for air, on top of the body, the pain in my leg blinding me, the world spinning. I heard the others calling for him on the radio, their voices growing more anxious, more confused. The absence of a reply was my most powerful weapon. Fear was now my greatest and strongest ally. With the leader now dead, panic began to spread among the remaining soldiers in his platoon. They didn't know how many of us there were. 1, 10, a whole battalion of ghosts in the night. I started using their own tactics against them, throwing rocks to create distracting, false sounds. I whispered orders in broken German, mimicking the leader's voice, sending them into my traps. The night became a labyrinth of psychological terror, and I was the minotaur at its dark center. One of them stepped on a snare trap I had set and was left hanging upside down from a tall tree. I didn't kill him. I left him there, screaming, his cries of terror echoing through the forest. His comrades, already terrified, didn't go to rescue him. They shot in the direction of the sound. They began shooting at each other, shadows fighting shadows, as madness completely took them over. I just watched from my hidden position the utter implosion of an elite unit, undone by fear. The sun rose, painting the fresh snow in shades of pink and orange, revealing the night's carnage. Bodies were scattered through the forest like broken dolls, a heavy, funereal silence in the air. The few survivors had fled, leaving behind their dead comrades and their dirted battle equipment. Limping badly, I dragged myself back to the convent. The pain in my ankle was a constant agony. I spent hours cleaning up the traces, burying the bodies in shallow graves, far from the walls. Each shovelful of dirt was a funeral prayer, an act of contrition for the souls I had sent away. No one in the convent seemed to notice anything. The children ate their breakfast just as always. The nuns sang their morning hymns, their sweet voices a sharp dissonance to my private hell. Only Leah, from her window, saw me return. Her eyes showed no surprise, only some understanding. She knew that the evil men from the forest would not be coming back again. The gardener pruned them. Winter gave way to spring, and life returned to the land with an almost insolent, raw ferocity. Where I had buried all the soldiers, the wildflowers grew taller and much more vibrant than before. It was as if the earth, fed by death, was generating a perverse and sickening kind of beauty. The children played in that field, unaware of the dark secrets that slept just beneath their feet. Sometimes I would see them picking flowers to take to the chapel, a bouquet born from violence. The irony was a bitter poison that burned in my throat, a secret that was consuming me from within. My ankle never healed correctly. The limp became a permanent part of me, a physical reminder. A reminder of the night I became a monster to protect angels, a true guardian demon from hell. The garden was my sanctuary and my tomb, a place of peace built upon the bones of a hidden war. How many sins can a single soul bear before it finally shatters into 1,000 pieces forever? The months passed, and the sounds of war began to recede, like a tide that is slowly going out. One day, we heard the rumble of tanks on the road, but this time, the flags they flew were different. They were American. Liberation had finally arrived, a concept so foreign it felt like a strange dream. The nuns cried with relief, and the children went out into the street for the first time in years. Young soldiers, with faces full of hope, handed out chocolate and warm smiles to all of them. They saw me, the limping and silent gardener, and offered me a cigarette, a gesture of sheer pity. I accepted it, but said nothing. How could I ever explain who I was or what I'd done for them? My war did not end with their celebrated arrival. My war would now live inside of me forever. I watched the celebration from a distance, a lonely figure leaning against the ivy-covered wall. For them, it was the end. For me, it was just the exchange of a physical prison for a mental one. On the night before my departure, I went to the shed and took the little lead soldier from the window. I went to the children's dormitory, a place I had never entered, and approached Leah's bedside. She was sleeping, her face serene, finally free from the shadows that had haunted her in the forest. I placed the small, broken soldier on her nightstand, right next to a single flower from the garden. It was my only goodbye, my only farewell to the one child who had seen the truth in my silence. I left the convent before dawn, limping down the road, without ever looking back, not even once. I was not a hero to be celebrated. I was a ghost who needed to disappear with the morning mist. I left behind the mute gardener and the soldier he hid, both of them buried together in that soil. I took with me only the memories, the faces, and the crushing weight of the sins I committed. War has many victims, but the very worst wounds are always the ones that nobody is able to see. Years passed, decades. The world rebuilt itself upon the ashes, as it always seems to do somehow. I grew old, my hair turned white, and the many scars on my soul became deeper and more painful. One day, visiting a war museum, I saw my own name on a plaque under an old photograph of me. Captain James Holloway, declared missing in action, 1943. Presumed to have been killed. I was a relic, a ghost at my own memorial, a story that had been given the entirely wrong ending. I stood there, looking at the young, idealistic face that had once been mine a lifetime ago. An elderly woman stopped beside me, her eyes fixed on the plaque, as if she could not believe it. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was a familiarity in her gaze, a spark of ancient memory. She turned to me, and time itself seemed to crumble, the museum walls becoming trees once more. Her eyes, still so large, contained the same galaxy of sorrows that I remembered from that place. Holloway, she whispered, the name sounding foreign, like a word from a long-forgotten language. I knew a man. At the convent, we called him Antoine. He didn't speak, and he couldn't hear. It was Leah. Her hair was now gray, but her eyes were still exactly the same as before. She stared at me, searching for the silent gardener in the wrinkled face of an old, strange man. After the American arrived, she continued, we found some strange things out in the forest. Graves, German equipment. They said a battle had happened there, but no one had heard a thing. The nuns said it was a miracle from God, that all of our many prayers had finally been answered. She paused, her eyes meeting mine with a certainty that crossed the 50 years between us then. But I always knew the real truth. There was a guardian angel in our garden, but he was different. She then turned to the museum curator, who approached and spoke the words that still haunt me. He was the only one who didn't pray. Leah's voice echoed in the solemn silence of that museum. He acted, Those two words hit me with more force than any bullet had ever managed to do in my entire life. He acted. It was both an absolution and a condemnation, all in the very same simple, short sentence. She did not need any confirmation. She did not ask me any questions. She just spoke her own truth. The truth of a child who understood that salvation sometimes does not come from the hands of God. It comes from the hands, dirty with earth and blood, of a broken man who sacrificed his own soul. I just turned around and walked away from the museum, leaving Captain Holloway hanging on the wall. Leah had given me the only epitaph that I would ever deserve, the only truth that really matters. They say a man's actions are what define him. But what happens when his best actions are his worst sins? That is a question that not God, nor history, nor even time will ever be able to answer for me.